The desert wind carried secrets men wished buried, but one choice would drag them into the light. On a lonely trail in the Arizona Territory, rancher Calder Hensley stumbled upon a sight that should have broken him. A young Apache girl, strung from a tree, a sign nailed above her head reading, "White Man's Mercy." Others had ridden past, but Calder did not. That moment, that mercy, set fire to every hidden grudge in town. What began as an act of compassion would unravel murder, corruption, and vengeance long buried, until the truth rose and demanded blood. This is the story of how one man's choice, whether to ride on or to stop, reshaped a frontier town forever. The road was empty until the silence grew too loud to trust. The Arizona sun lay heavy across the land, baking stone and brush alike, until the horizon wavered like a fever dream. Calder Hensley rode slowly, his sorrel gelding's hooves crunching on the crust of dry earth. He was a man accustomed to the lonely cadence of the trail, dust rising, leather creaking, no voices but the wind. To him, silence was an old companion, one that steadied his thoughts and kept the world predictable. But today, silence pressed on him differently. It seemed to hold its breath. Calder had been trailing stray cattle since morning, their prints fading in the hard ground, lost in the gullies where shadows still clung. He expected little more than another day's work before nightfall. Drive them home, mend the south fence, eat beans by the fire. Simple, predictable, safe. Yet a faint sound, almost imagined, tugged his head to the left. Not the bawl of a calf, not the caw of a crow. It was a broken sound, thin and ragged, like life clinging to its last thread. He drew rein. The gelding tossed its head, uneasy. Calder listened harder, the weight in his chest tightening. That was when he saw it. In the shallow stand of cottonwoods ahead, a shape swayed. At first, he thought it might be a tarp or a branch caught in the wind. Then his eyes caught the darker lines, a rope drawn tight, a body dangling against bark. His stomach turned cold. He spurred forward, boots tightening against the gelding's flanks. Dust boiled around him as he closed the distance, and soon the awful sight cleared. A girl, no more than 12, maybe 13, hung limp from a coarse hemp rope, her dark hair matted, face streaked with grime and blood. A crude board had been nailed above her head, its words scrawled in coal-black letters, "White Man's Mercy." Calder froze. For a moment, the world shrank to the brutal sign and the fragile figure beneath it. The wind carried no sound, but the groan of the branch, each sway of the rope carving the words deeper into his mind. He knew what this was, a message, a warning, a cruelty meant not only for her but for anyone who dared defy the men who left her here. Then, another sound. Weak, stuttering. A breath. She was alive. Calder's heart slammed against his ribs. He swung down from the saddle, knife already in hand. The bark tore his knuckles as he scrambled up the tree, sawing at the thick rope until it gave. She dropped suddenly, too light for the fall to break bones, landing in a heap at the base of the tree. Calder leapt down after her, rolling her onto her back. Her lips parted, a dry rasp escaping. Her eyes opened for the briefest instant, black, frightened, glimmering with pain, before fluttering shut again. "She's breathing," Calder muttered to himself, though no one was there to hear. He tore the rope from her neck, fingers shaking as he pressed for a pulse at her throat. Weak, but steady. His gut knotted. Whoever had left her like this meant for her to be found swinging, lifeless, her death an example carved into memory. They hadn't expected anyone to cut her down. He glanced at the sign again, anger boiling in his chest. White Man's Mercy. It was no mercy at all, only the cold cruelty of men who used fear as a brand. The girl stirred faintly, a groan slipping from her cracked lips. Calder's jaw tightened. He could not leave her here. But bringing her back, what would it mean? He knew the town. He knew the whispers, the prejudice that simmered just beneath the surface. They would call him a fool, or worse, a traitor. To them, she wasn't a child, wasn't a victim. She was a symbol of all they feared and hated. But Calder had lived long enough with silence to recognize when a man's conscience spoke louder. He pulled his canteen from his saddlebag, tipping a trickle of water to her lips. She swallowed, barely, the sound of it scraping in her throat. "You hold on," he said softly, as though his voice might anchor her spirit to her body. The gelding stamped nervously, ears flicking at unseen things in the brush. Calder cast a long look around the cottonwoods. No riders, no shadows moving where they shouldn't. But he felt eyes, distant and watching. Maybe the men who did this lingered to see their message received. Maybe they wanted to know if fear still worked. He scooped the girl up carefully, her weight scarcely more than a sack of grain. She shifted weakly in his arms, a whimper rising from her chest, and his throat clenched. She was so small, so breakable. He carried her to the saddle, lifted her before him, and swung up with one arm braced against her frail body. "Easy now," he murmured, though it was unclear whether he spoke to the horse or the girl. With a sharp kick, the gelding moved forward, carrying them out of the cottonwoods and back toward open country. Calder did not look back at the tree, though he felt its shadow follow. He knew the sign still hung there, its words burning into the desert air. What he did not know, what he could not yet know, was that the choice to stop and cut her down would ignite something far greater than one man's mercy. The town would hear, the land barons would stir, and the truth she carried, hidden behind, her frightened eyes, would soon drag every soul into reckoning. For now Calder only rode on, the girl breathing faintly against his chest, the sun lowering on a day that had changed everything. Morning came with silence too heavy to trust. Calder did not sleep that night. The girl lay wrapped in an old quilt by his hearth, her breath shallow but stubborn, as though her spirit clung in defiance of the cruelty meant to end her. Every time the fire snapped, his eyes jerked open. He had carried her all the way from the cottonwoods to his homestead, each mile ridden beneath the weight of what it would mean. By dawn, his body ached with more than fatigue. When the first light filtered through the cracks of the shutters, Calder rose from his chair. His boots scuffed the plank floor as he checked the girl again. Her lips were dry, skin pale beneath the dirt, but her chest rose and fell. Alive. Against all odds. Alive. He tipped a spoonful of broth to her mouth, coaxing her to swallow. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing a brief glimmer of dark eyes before shutting again. "You're safe," he muttered, though the words sounded hollow even to himself. Because she wasn't safe. Not here. Not in this town. The rope around her neck hadn't been tied by strangers passing through. It had been done by men who lived within a day's ride. Men with influence, land, and enough cruelty to write their message in blood and wood. By mid-morning, Calder saddled up. He couldn't avoid town forever. Supplies were running thin, and he knew word would spread regardless. In places like this, gossip traveled faster than dust on the wind. If folks hadn't seen him ride back with the girl, they'd surely notice soon, better to face it head on. The streets of Dry Creek lay half awake as he rode in. A couple of ranch hands leaned against the hitching post outside the livery, hats pulled low. Mrs. Talbot swept dust from her porch, her sharp eyes catching Calder at once. She paused, broom stiff in her hands. The look she gave him was one of recognition and suspicion. "Morning," Calder offered flatly. She didn't answer, only turned, muttering under her breath as she pushed back inside. Calder dismounted. At the general store, the creak of saddle leather echoing louder than usual in the quiet. Inside, Old man Kershaw glanced up from behind the counter, spectacles perched low on his nose. "You look like you've carried the devil on your back," Kershaw said. "Just need flour, coffee, and salt," Calder replied, voice clipped. The shopkeeper fetched the supplies, but his eyes lingered too long. Finally, he leaned in closer. "Word is, you brought something home from the cottonwoods." Calder's jaw tightened. "I brought a child." Kershaw lowered his voice. "That child ain't just any child. Folks are saying she's Apache." Calder said nothing, sliding coins across the counter. "Listen," Kershaw pressed. "You do what you want out on your land, but bringing her into town, that's asking for trouble. People won't see a girl. They'll see the blood her people shed, whether she's guilty of it or not." Calder gathered his goods without answering. The shop door swung shut behind him with a clang that seemed to echo across the street. By the time he'd tied down the supplies, a shadow fell across him. Sheriff Alcott stood there, his badge catching the morning sun, his expression heavy. "Heard a story," the sheriff said. "I imagine you did." Alcott studied him for a long moment. "Calder, you know what they left her up there for. That wasn't punishment, it was theater. Men like Farnsworth wanted her hanging there as a message. You take her down, bring her home, you've undone that message. They won't let it go." "Then they'll have to come to my door to say it," Calder replied, voice like stone. The sheriff sighed. "You've always been a stubborn son of a gun, but listen, if you keep her, it won't just be Farnsworth, it'll be half the town. They'll say you've chosen sides." "I didn't choose sides," Calder said, anger sparking low in his chest. "I chose mercy," the sheriff tipped his hat back, eyes weary. "Mercy, don't buy much here." Calder swung into his saddle, the supplies rattling in his saddlebags. He didn't look back as he rode out of town, though he felt the eyes on him from every porch, every window. The whispers had already started. By nightfall, they'd grow into accusations. When he returned home, the girl was awake. Barely, but awake. Her eyes fixed on him as he entered, wide and sharp despite her weakness. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Fear lived in those eyes, but so did something else, knowledge, secrets too large for a child to hold. Calder knelt beside her, his voice gentler than he knew it could be. "You don't have to say anything. Yet. You're safe here." But as her gaze lingered, steady and silent, Calder realized safety was a word he might not be able to promise. Because if she had lived through what he feared, if her family had been slaughtered, if men in town had blood on their hands, then her silence was a storm waiting to break. And when it did, it would drag him and the whole of Dry Creek into its path. The wind carried whispers sharper than knives. By the next evening, Calder felt the change. It wasn't just the air, though a storm brewed low on the horizon. It was the way the land itself seemed to lean, as if bracing for what was coming. Dry Creek was never a quiet town. There was always the clatter of wagons, the laughter spilling from the saloon, the iron clang of the blacksmith's hammer. But now, every sound felt edged with tension, every face shadowed with suspicion. The whispers had spread faster than fire on dry grass. Calder knew it before he even set foot on Main Street again. At the blacksmith's, 2 men lowered their voices as he passed, their eyes cutting toward him with something darker than curiosity. At the mercantile, Mrs. Talbot crossed herself as though his very shadow carried sin. By the saloon, a ranch hand spat into the dirt and muttered loud enough to carry, "Mercy for them means death for us." Calder ignored it, but his fists curled, tight against his thighs. Back at the homestead, the girl's strength was beginning to flicker back. She could sit propped against the wall, her gaze following him as he moved around the cabin. She still hadn't spoken, but she no longer looked at him with fear. There was something harder now, watchful, as though she weighed his every action, measuring whether he was worthy of her trust. He wanted to tell her she was safe. He wanted to promise her warmth, protection, food for her hunger, and rest for her wounds. But words felt fragile, too small to contain the truth of what pressed in from outside. The knock came just after dusk. 3 sharp raps, insistent. Calder rose from his chair, hand brushing the rifle by the door, before swinging. It opened. Russell Farnsworth stood there. The cattle baron filled the doorway with his bulk, hat tilted low, eyes gleaming like a wolf's. 2 of his men lingered behind him, shadows against the twilight. Farnsworth smiled, though there was no kindness in it. "Evenin', Calder," he drawled. "Evenin'," Calder replied evenly. "I hear you picked up something that didn't belong to you." Farnsworth shifted his weight, spurs biting into the wood. "Now, you know as well as I do, some things are meant to stay where they're left. Messages, for instance. Messages are powerful when left untouched." Calder's jaw set. "She's a child, not a message." Farnsworth's grin widened, showing teeth. "Child or not, she carries weight you don't understand. You think you're saving her, but you're only stirring the pot. The town's uneasy. Folks don't like the idea of one of theirs nursing an Apache under his roof. Makes them wonder what side you're on." "I'm not on a side," Calder said. "I'm doing what's right." "Right," Farnsworth echoed, the word dripping with mockery. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What's right won't keep you alive. What's right won't keep this town from burning. You've brought a spark into dry grass, Calder, and when it catches, well..." He tipped his hat back, eyes glittering. "Don't say I didn't warn you!" The girl stirred from her pallet, her eyes catching the light of the fire. Farnsworth noticed her gaze, and for a moment, his smile faltered. He looked at her the way a man might look at a witness. Calder stepped into the doorway, blocking his view. "That's enough," Calder said coldly. Farnsworth's grin returned, sharper than before. "Enjoy your company while you can." He turned, boots grinding the dirt, his men following. Their laughter echoed across the yard as they mounted and rode into the night. Calder shut the door, his hand still pressed to the wood. His breath came slow, controlled, but his heart hammered. He looked back at the girl. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on him as though she had seen this dance before. Maybe she had. He crouched beside her, voice low. "You don't have to be afraid. Not here." But the truth pressed in like the storm building outside. He could not protect her with words alone. Farnsworth had marked his door, and the town would soon decide whether Calder Hensley was a rancher to trust or a man to break. That night, as lightning crawled along the horizon and the wind rattled the shutters, Calder sat awake with his rifle across his knees. The girl dozed lightly by the fire, her face softer in the glow, but her hands clenched even in sleep as though she held on to something unseen. And Calder knew, whatever she carried, whatever truth lay hidden in her silence, it was enough to make powerful men tremble, enough to bring violence to his very doorstep. The night broke open with truths too heavy to stay buried. The storm that had threatened all evening finally split the sky. Rain came down in sheets, hammering against the roof, rattling through the eaves. Calder sat near the fire, rifle propped against his leg, watching the flames fight the drafts that slipped through the cracks. The girl lay curled on the pallet, quilt drawn tight around her shoulders. But tonight, she did not sleep easily. She murmured, low, broken words, in her own tongue, eyes fluttering as though her dreams pulled her back into terror. Calder rose, kneeling beside her. "You're safe," he said softly, though he knew the words were fragile things in a world this cruel. He laid a hand gently on her shoulder, not pressing, only steadying. Her eyes snapped open, black pools, wide with panic, but then recognition. She saw him, and though her breathing stayed sharp, she did not flinch away. For the first time her lips moved to form a word, rough, cracked, but clear. Family. Calder's chest tightened. He leaned closer. Where? She lifted a trembling hand, pointing toward the east. Her voice wavered again, softer. Gone. And then, like a door creaking open, the story began to spill. Not in full sentences, not yet, but in fragments, names, cries, fire, gunshots. Calder pieced it together, his stomach knotting with each broken syllable. Her family had been attacked, their camp torn apart in the night. She had hidden, but she saw enough to know who had ridden in with rifles and torches. And among them. And she recognized from Dry Creek. Calder sat back hard, his breath leaving him in a hiss. The storm outside raged, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside him. He had suspected cruelty, suspected the rope was meant as more than punishment. But to hear it, to hear that men of the town, perhaps men in Farnsworth's pay, had slaughtered her kin, that was a truth too heavy to ignore. The girl's eyes glistened in the firelight. She whispered one more word, shaped carefully as though it might cost her breath. Farnsworth. Calder's jaw locked. The name was bitter ash on his tongue. He rose, pacing the length of the cabin, the boards creaking beneath his boots. Farnsworth wasn't just a land baron. He was the weight behind half the decisions in Dry Creek, the money in the sheriff's pocket, the whisper in the judge's ear, the shadow stretching longer than the sun. And now Calder knew why the girl had been left swinging, not only as a message but as a loose end. She had seen. He turned back to her. You keep that truth close, he said, voice low, firm. Don't tell it to anyone but me, not yet. Her gaze held his. Young but steady. There was pain there and fear, but also something harder. Resilience, born from fire and loss. The tway. In rain eased toward morning, leaving the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. Calder stepped outside, the ground slick beneath his boots. He looked toward the town, just visible where the plain rose into lights. Every drop of water seemed to carry the weight of a decision. By the time he returned inside, the girl had dozed again, exhaustion pulling her under. Calder stoked the fire higher and sat beside it, his mind running circles. If the truth ever reached daylight, Dry Creek would tear itself apart. Men like Farnsworth would not hesitate to silence her forever, asterisk. But if Calder kept her hidden, if he guarded the truth alone, then he carried the weight of justice on his shoulders. And he knew it was only a matter of time before the storm came pounding at his door. By midday the pounding came, though not with thunder. Sheriff Alcott again, this time with his jaw set harder, his badge glinting against the gray light. Calder, the sheriff said, I don't come here with pleasure. Word's out. The girl's alive, she's under your roof. That rope wasn't meant to slip. You know what folks are saying? That you're harboring a murderer's blood. Some want a meeting. Some want her gone. And Farnsworth. He stopped, himself, but his silence said more than words. Calder stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him so the girl would not hear. If Farnsworth wants her gone, that tells me she knows something he's afraid of. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You're treading dangerous ground. Whatever you think you're protecting, it's bigger than you. And I won't be able to hold off a mob if one comes riding. Calder's voice was iron. Then let them ride. I'll meet them. The sheriff shook his head. Stubborn fool. He mounted up, reins snapping, his figure soon swallowed by the rain-dark horizon. Inside, Calder leaned against the door, the wood cool against his back. He exhaled slowly, steadily, then looked at the girl by the fire. Her eyes were open now, fixed on him. She had heard more than he wanted, and she understood. This was no longer just about survival. It was about truth. and truth had a way of demanding blood before it found peace. The day broke with riders in the dust, and none came as friends. By noon the next day, Calder's homestead no longer felt like a refuge. Dust rose on the eastern ridge, not from cattle, but from men on horseback. He spotted them long before. They reached his gate. 4 riders in Farnsworth's colors, spurs flashing, rifles slung loose across their saddles. They didn't ride with the aimless sway of ranch hands. They rode with purpose, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on his door. Calder stepped off the porch, rifle in hand, but pointed low. The girl was inside, tucked behind the table where the fire still burned. He didn't want her to see this. The first rider to dismount was Rig Porter, Farnsworth's foreman, a man with a face line from squinting into the sun and cruelty both. He spat into the dust before speaking. "Afternoon, Hensley. We've come for the girl." Calder's grip tightened on the rifle. "She's not yours to take." Riggs smirked, showing a gap in his teeth. "Ain't yours either. She's Apache. She's proof of what they've done. Men have a right to see justice done." "Justice," Calder said, his voice hard as stone. "You left her hanging like a scarecrow. That wasn't justice, that was murder." Riggs' smile thinned. "You call it murder. We call it keeping this land safe. Farnsworth says she goes and she goes." The other men shifted in there, saddles, hands brushing rifle stocks, waiting for the word. Calder lifted his rifle a fraction, enough for them to see the barrel catch the sun. "And Farnsworth doesn't make law here," Calder said evenly. "And neither do you. You want to drag her out, you'll step past me first." For a moment, no one moved. Only the creak of leather and the restless snort of horses broke the air. Finally, Riggs spat again, his grin sour. "You just signed your own death note, Hensley. Man can't stand against a whole town." He mounted up, jerking his reins hard. "We'll be back. Next time we won't knock." The riders turned, kicking dust as they thundered away. Calder lowered his rifle slowly, his breath easing only when they vanished over the ridge. He leaned against the porch post, the weight of what had just passed heavy on his shoulders. Inside, the girl stared at him, eyes wide but steady. She had heard. She had seen. And in her silence, Calder felt a bond tighten, not chosen by him, not spoken by her, but forged in the crucible of danger, shared. That night, whispers became more than whispers. Sheriff Alcott arrived after sundown, his face grave, his voice low. "They're calling a meeting tomorrow," he said. "Farnsworth's stirring 'em up. Claiming the girl's presence puts everyone in danger. He says she's a spy, says she saw things she wasn't meant to. Men are listening. They're talking about riding up here together." Calder folded his arms. "A mob," the sheriff nodded. "And when a mob gathers, reason leaves the room." Calder stared into the fire. The girl sat close by, clutching a cup of broth in small hands, her eyes reflecting the flames. He thought of what she'd told him, fragments of truth stitched together with grief, Farnsworth's name, his riders, the massacre. "She knows," Calder said finally. "She saw what they did. That's why they want her gone." The sheriff's shoulders slumped. "Then you hold something more dangerous than gold. Truth like that doesn't set folks free. It gets them killed." Calder's voice sharpened. "Then let it kill me before I hand her over." The sheriff looked at him, for a long, heavy moment. "I'll try to hold 'em off," he said at last, "but I can't stop 'em if they come in numbers." He tipped his hat and left, his figure swallowed by the dark. The girl set her cup down, her small voice breaking the quiet. "Why?" Calder turned, startled. It was the first word she had spoken in English. She looked at him with raw, searching eyes. "Why help me?" He crouched, meeting her gaze. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "Because mercy means more than a word on a sign." She held his stare, then nodded once, small but fierce. And in that nod, Calder felt a shift. No longer just a child under his roof, she was a witness, an anchor, a reason worth standing for. Outside, the wind carried the sound of coyotes, their cries sharp against the night. Calder sat back by the fire, rifle across his knees. He knew Farnsworth would come again. Knew the town would not rest until they had forced a choice from him. But mercy had already chosen for him. And come what may, he would not yield. The morning smelled of dust and gunpowder, though no shots had yet been fired. Calder rose before the sun, the girl still curled beneath her quilt. He stepped out onto the porch, boots grinding against the boards, and scanned the horizon. The land felt tight, drawn taut like a rope about to snap. He knew today would not pass without blood or reckoning. By mid-morning, the dust plume came. Riders, a dozen, maybe more. They crested the ridge like a storm, the thud of hooves rolling, across the plain. Calder's hand fell to the rifle, leaning against the porch. He stood tall, every line of his frame defiant. At their head rode Russell Farnsworth. His hat was pulled low, but the smirk beneath it needed no sunlight to shine. Sheriff Alcott trailed reluctantly at his side, jaw tight, as if dragged along by duty more than will. The rest, ranchers, drifters, men who owed Farnsworth coin or loyalty, spread behind like the tail of a whip. They reined up before the gate, dust boiling around their horses' legs. Farnsworth dismounted slowly, deliberately, like a man, stepping into a parlor instead of onto another man's land. "Morning, Hensley," he called, voice carrying smooth as oil. "Heard tell you've been harboring something that don't belong to you. Figured we'd come and set matters right." Calder's, a voice cut flat across the air. "She's not yours, Farnsworth. She's not a thing to be claimed." Farnsworth spread his hands. "Now don't make this harder than it has to be. You know what she is. You know what she's seen. Men in this town won't rest easy till she's gone. We can do this clean, or we can do this bloody. Your choice." The sheriff shifted uneasily, muttering low. "Farnsworth," but Farnsworth silenced him with a glance. "Law's only as strong as the men willing to enforce it, and I reckon today the men stand with me." A murmur rose from the riders, boots shifting in stirrups, rifles adjusting against saddles. Calder raised his rifle, barrel leveled square at Farnsworth's chest. His voice was cold iron. "You take one step closer, and I'll show you what line you just crossed." The girl appeared in the doorway then, quilt draped over her shoulders, eyes dark as storm clouds. She clutched the frame with both hands, her small body trembling, but her gaze steady. Farnsworth's eyes flicked toward her, and for a heartbeat his mask slipped. "She knows," Calder said, voice carrying like a hammer strike. "She saw what you did. She saw your riders. She saw you burn her family's camp. You can hang and sign on a child and call it mercy, but she carries the truth. That's why you want her dead." A ripple went through the gathered men. Some shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. A few lowered their rifles a fraction. Truth was a dangerous thing, heavier than any bullet. Farnsworth's jaw worked, anger flashing hot. "Lies from a half-blood brat!" "You think these men'll listen to the word of a savage?" The girl lifted her chin, small but fierce, and spoke in a voice clear enough for all to hear. "I saw you." Silence fell. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Farnsworth turned, eyes scanning his men, seeking their loyalty. Some met his gaze, others didn't. Calder stepped forward, rifle steady. "You talk about sides, Farnsworth. Well, here's mine. I'll stand for mercy. I'll stand for truth. And if any man here wants to ride through me to take her, then ride on. But know this, there ain't no going back from that choice." The sheriff's voice cracked through the stillness, rough but strong. "Enough! This ain't justice. It's murder dressed up as order. I won't stand by it." His hand went to his revolver, not aimed at Calder but levelled toward the mob. The shift was small, but it rippled outward. More rifles lowered, eyes darted, doubt spreading like cracks in ice. Farnsworth's face darkened, the smile gone. "You'll regret this," he hissed, "all of you." He swung into his saddle, rage stiff in every movement. With a sharp tug, he turned his horse, spitting dust behind him as he rode back toward town. A few loyal men followed quickly, but others lingered, unease written plain across their faces. None dared meet Calder's eyes. At last, the ridge cleared, and silence returned, heavy as the storm clouds above. Calder lowered his rifle, breath sharp in his lungs. The girl still stood in the doorway, trembling but unbroken. He met her gaze, then looked to the sheriff. Alcott's face was pale, worn but resolute. "This ain't over," the sheriff muttered. "He won't stop till he's buried it, or till we bury him." Calder nodded slowly. He already knew. Mercy had lit the fuse, and the fire now burned toward the powder keg. The sun fell red, and the town gathered like vultures circling a carcass. Dry Creek had not seen so many folk in one place since the last cattle auction. By evening, the street outside the saloon and courthouse swelled with riders, townsfolk, and drifters pulled in by curiosity and fear alike. Word had spread fast. Calder Hensley was defying Farnsworth, harboring the Apache girl who bore witness to a massacre. Tonight, Farnsworth meant to end it. Calder rode in slow, the girl seated before him on the saddle, her small hands clutching the horn tight. Sheriff Alcott flanked him, jaw set, hat pulled low. The crowd parted only enough to let them through, faces hard and muttering. Women clutched shawls tighter, men spat into the dust, and children stared wide-eyed from porches. Every eye followed him as though waiting for blood to spill. At the center of the street stood Russell Farnsworth. His coat was clean, his boots polished, his revolver gleaming at his hip. Men loyal to him ringed the street, rifles visible, their smirks daring anyone to oppose. Behind him, the preacher and judge loitered, their silence bought long ago. Farnsworth spread his arms as Calder dismounted, the girl slipping down beside him. "Well now," Farnsworth drawled, voice loud enough for all to hear. "Look what—" The desert dragged in, a stubborn fool and a savage child. "You could have handed her over quietly, Hensley. Instead, you bring trouble down on every man, woman, and child in Dry Creek." Murmurs rippled. Fear, doubt, anger. Calder kept his voice. "Even but Strung. She's no trouble, she's true. And it's time this town saw it." He turned, nodding to the girl. She hesitated only a moment, then stepped forward. Her voice, though small, cut the silence like a blade. "I saw him. Farnsworth. He killed my family. His men burned our camp." The words fell like stones into water, ripples widening through the crowd. Asterisk. Some gasped. Some shook their heads. Farnsworth barked a laugh, sharp and ugly. "You hear that? Lies from a child who doesn't speak your tongue half properly. She saw, in shadows and fire, and named a man because she was told to. And you," he jabbed a finger at Calder, "you put her up to it. You drag my name through the mud to play hero." Sheriff Alcott stepped forward. "I've known Calder Hensley for 10 years. He's many things, but liar ain't one. Give 'em. And I've heard whispers myself about riders gone missing from your outfit on the very night her people were slaughtered." The crowd stirred. Doubt grew thicker. Farnsworth's mask cracked, fury bleeding through. He yanked his revolver from its holster, leveling it at the girl. "Enough! If no one else'll do it, I'll silence her myself." The world slowed. Calder moved without thought, shoving the girl behind him, rifle snapping up. The street erupted. In chaos, shouts, gasps, boots scrambling in the dirt. The first shot thundered, Farnsworth's bullet splintering the hitching post inches from Calder's leg. Calder's rifle barked back, the recoil slamming into his shoulder. Farnsworth staggered, his revolver flying from his grip as the round tore across his arm. He roared in pain, clutching the wound. And then the town erupted. Some of Farnsworth's men fired shots, cracking through windows and walls. Others held back, unwilling to murder neighbors for another man's pride. The sheriff's revolver spat fire, dropping one of Farnsworth's loyalists before the man could aim at the girl. Calder worked the rifle levers smoothly and fast. Each round fired not in frenzy, but with deadly calm. The girl crouched low, hands over her ears, eyes wide as the world she'd feared came crashing down around her. Dust rose, horses screamed, and the sharp smell of gunpowder filled the air. Farnsworth, bleeding and furious, lunged for another pistol on his man's belt. He swung it up, aiming not at the girl now, but at Calder's heart. "Mercy is weakness," he roared. Calder's rifle cracked again. Farnsworth jerked, eyes wide with shock, before crumpling into the dirt. His blood soaked into the dust he'd ruled over for years. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of cooling barrels and the ragged breaths of the living. The mob's energy faltered, broken without its head. Some dropped rifles, others stepped back, shame and uncertainty flickering across their faces. The sheriff stood tall, revolver still in hand, voice cutting through the night. "This ends now. No more mobs, no more fear. The truth's come out, and it's been paid for in blood. Anyone who raises another hand tonight will answer to me, and to the law." No one stepped forward. Calder lowered his rifle, chest heaving. He turned to the girl, pulling her gently to her feet. She looked at Farnsworth's body, then up at him. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but for the first time, they weren't only of fear. They were released. The town had seen the truth, and, though scars would remain, though whispers would linger, the lie that had hung her from that tree was broken forever. The dust settled slower than the blood, but both left their mark. Dry Creek was a quieter place the morning after. The saloon's piano sat silent, shutters drawn. The judge's porch, once a stage for Farnsworth's boasts, stood empty. The dirt street still bore the black stains where gunpowder and blood had mixed, but now only the wind moved there. Men who had raised rifles the night before kept their heads low, unwilling to meet the gaze of those who had stood for truth. At Calder's homestead, the girl sat wrapped in her quilt, her small hands folded around a steaming cup of broth. Her eyes were still tired, but they no longer carried the same hollow terror. She watched the fire, quiet, but she was present in a way she hadn't been before. Sheriff Alcott stopped by near noon, his hat in hand. His voice was weary but clear. "Town won't soon forget what they saw. Farnsworth's men'll scatter. Some'll try to slip away, some'll beg forgiveness. Truth is, Calder, you didn't just save her. You cut the legs out from under a tyrant." Calder gave a slow nod. "Truth's heavier than any cattle I ever drove. But it was time someone carried it." The sheriff tipped his hat, then looked at the girl. "She'll need more than a roof. She'll need a name, a place. Folks'll watch to see if she's one of us, or always a reminder of what was done." Calder met her eyes across the fire. For the first time she spoke without hesitation. Her voice was small but steady. "Home," the word fell like a prayer into the room. Calder's throat tightened. He crouched down, eye level with her. "Then that's what you'll have. Here." "With me?" Her lips quivered, but a faint smile touched her face, fragile as a sprout in the desert soil. She reached out, her hand slipping into his rough palm. For a moment, the cabin's silence was not heavy, but full. That evening, Calder stepped outside. The land stretched wide and scarred before him, the sky painted with streaks of gold. He thought of the sign nailed above her head, "White Man's Mercy." He thought of how mercy had been twisted into cruelty. how a rope had nearly stolen a child's life, and he thought of the choice he'd made on that trail. To stop. To cut her down, to bring her home. It had cost him. It had nearly cost him everything, but it had also given him something greater than he had ever expected: purpose, belonging, the fragile start of a family. He turned back toward the cabin, where light spilled warm through the shutters, and the sound of the girl's laughter, soft, tentative, but real, rose into the twilight. And so the story spread, of a rancher who defied a town's fear, who stood against a powerful man who chose mercy when cruelty was easier. Some would call it folly. Others would call it justice, but to those who lived it, it became more than memory. It became history. And that is how one act of mercy, born on a dusty trail in the Arizona Territory, reshaped a town forever. Calder. Hensley's choice to cut down a child instead of riding past became the story that proved kindness is not weakness, and that truth, no matter the cost, demands to be carried. If this tale struck you, friend, don't ride off just yet. Leave a like, share it with someone who'd walk this trail beside you, and subscribe so you can join us for the next story of the frontier. Until then, may your own trail be steady, your hearth warm, and your heart unburdened.